Hello friends, and welcome to another video. Today we're going to be doing my September wrap-up, and full disclosure, I really don't know what happened this month, but something weird did, and here we are. So to begin with, I had created a TBR back at the beginning of September that I tried my absolute hardest to stick with, but per usual, when it comes to these things, it did not end up sticking to this. Anyway, the first book I read this month was one that I have been trying to finish since before COVID happened, and it's through no fault of the book's own, but that is Ancillary Sword by Ann Leckie. It is book 2 in the Ancillary Justice trilogy, which I think is also called the Imperial Raj, or however you say that. And I just was having a really hard time focusing, and that is absolutely one book series you have to focus on. I did give it 4 stars. I didn't like it as much as I liked the first one, and I think it kind of dragged and meandered around and spent a little too much time drinking tea and not enough time on the plot, because once we actually got to the plot, I was blown away, in love, so happy with it, and then the resolution of it was perfect. The next book I read was Bloody Rose by Nicholas Eames, which is the sequel to Kings of the Wild. I enjoyed this book. I thought it was a lot darker and more mature in tone than the first book was, and there were a lot of times, because the subject matter of the book was so dark in comparison, the humor kind of felt a little forced and a little flat, but ultimately I did give this 4.5 stars. The next book I read, which I'm sure if you've seen my Labor Day reading vlog, you've seen me complain about, and it's also why I just don't read thrillers that often, was 8 Perfect Murders by Peter Swanson. This was about a guy who lived in, or worked in a bookstore and got roped into a FBI investigation. It was painfully predictable. It was very much written by a man in a pretentious white male protagonist sort of voice. Drove me crazy, and it had unreliable narrator tropes, which I don't like very much to begin with either, and the whole thing just didn't work for me, so I gave it, I think, 1.5 out of 5 stars. The next book I read kind of had some similar issues, but I enjoyed this one a lot more, and that was Promise of Blood by Brian McClellan. This one wasn't as sexist and annoying, but there were very few female characters, and then the female characters that did exist were either called savages or just kind of pushed to the background, and I didn't really appreciate that. And after that, I read 2 Frederick Backman books, both of which got 5 out of 5 stars. Anything Frederick Backman writes is almost guaranteed to get a 5 out of 5 star rating for me. But the first one was Anxious People, which is his newest one, and I loved this so much. His character work is always like the best, and the themes in this, he talked a lot about suicide and about just how much the world sucks and how much we need to depend on other people anyway, and how all of the characters related to each other and the resolution overall of the story. It made my heart happy. And then the other one I read was his sequel to Beartown, which is called Us Against Them, or Us Against You. Yeah, Us Against You. I didn't like Beartown, not because the writing or the characters were bad, but just because of the subject matter. And I was very, very nervous going into this one. One, I haven't read Beartown in like 3 years, so I was worried that I wasn't going to know anything, and I really did not want to read Beartown. And 2, I was really hesitant to see how it was going to move forward, given what the first book was about. And I have to say, I was very pleasantly surprised with where this book went. It talked a lot about moving on and the challenges of moving on after an event like what happened in the first book happened, and I thought it was wonderfully done. I really, really liked this book. He talked about so many issues that are still painfully relevant today, and he just does it with such grace and poise, and again, he once again cemented himself as one of my all-time favorite authors. After that, I read A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. I was actually pleasantly surprised by how much I did not hate this, and I actually want to read A Court of Mist and Fury, and I kind of want to continue with the rest of the series, and then go back and read the Throne of Glass series. It wasn't like anything spectacular. It is exactly what you think it is, and I wasn't mad about it. So, you know, it's fine. After that, I read The Night Tiger by Yang Si-chu. This has been on my list since it came out a couple of years ago, and I'm so glad I finally sat down and read it. On a whole, I actually really love this. The magical realism was beautiful. The lore and the discussion of colonization was amazing. The author handled everything beautifully, except for one thing, which I did legitimately not get a star for, and that was the romance in the book. That irritated me. It went, I don't want to spoil anything, but the romance really, really frustrated me in that. After that, I read A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. I will admit that I did not really read the third part of this book. I skim read it because by that point I was just so frustrated with it on a whole that I'm just like, I need this to be over. There were moments of brilliance in this that I liked. I loved the discussion of what actually happened in the Capitol during the war. I loved the idea of following somebody who had such a impacted life from the war, and I liked seeing like how things that we know were to come about in the Hunger Games came about. I didn't like how they actually came about in the book, but I liked the idea of discovering more behind that. I wish she had done, or Suzanne Collins had done more in that aspect instead of focusing so much on Snow. And I really hated the romance in that too. I do not necessarily hate romances in books when they're done well. This one was not done well. Honestly, I was a little irritated that we got so much focus on District 12 again. Like, I feel like she could have used this opportunity to explore more of the districts and like deepen the world building instead of staying so close to what we already knew. And then I also kind of feel like she gave us a lot of backstory and explanation to things that we didn't necessarily need. And then just because I was curious to see, because I was not actually a fan of the Hunger Games books, I went back and read that trilogy as well to see, like, is this just me not vibing with this author, or is it really just the book? Like, spoiler alert for my next set of 3 books. It was absolutely just The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, which I did give a 2.5 out of 5 stars. I really appreciated the Hunger Games series as a whole a lot more this time around, and I gave all of them 5 out of 5 stars. Like, even Mockingjay, I remember really not liking the first couple times I read it, but this time around, like, it made more sense. Katniss was a lot less whiny and a lot more somebody who has really been through a lot of shit, and as somebody who has suffered through a lot of depression and PTSD myself, it was just interesting reading from that mindset of a female protagonist, because we never get that. And I feel like she was totally validated in so many of her choices that she made, and it all just made so much more sense. And then I was reading a review on A Court of Thorns and Roses on Goodreads, and this is kind of what sparked the rest of this. And she was comparing the main female character, whose name I can't remember, from A Court of Thorns and Roses, to, like, as a mix between Katniss and Bella from Twilight. So, of course, I picked up Twilight. I know, guys, I know. Leave me alone. I picked up the Twilight series. Full disclaimer, I have read these multiple times throughout my life. I got really, really obsessed with all of them. So I went through and I read Twilight, and I knew I was going to read at least Twilight and New Moon, because New Moon is actually my favorite because there are no vampires in it, and because Bella has to figure out who she is outside of her relationship, and because we get to explore something other than just vampires, and I'm such a wolf girl. I was never Team Jacob, by the way. I honestly didn't care who she ended up with. But also with New Moon, I read this a lot, like, for over the course of a month. I read it like 3 or 4 times in high school, because I just lost my best friend at the time, and I kind of felt similar to what Bella was going through during that, and so it just kind of became my safety net, and I only really felt okay when I was reading this book over and over and over again. And I have recently gone through a lot of a very similar situation to what Bella did in the beginning, where somebody I really truly cared about left me kind of deal. And reading New Moon now just kind of hit a little too close to home in a lot of ways, especially in terms of how she had to put herself back together after all of that and how she kind of honestly failed. And with that, I realized a couple of things. One, I've actually done a pretty good job of putting myself back together. And two, I don't need Edward to come back and rescue me from anything. But I gave that one 4 out of 5 stars. I gave Twilight, I think, 3, just because nostalgia. I'm not going to get into all of the arguments as to why Twilight's terrible. We all know that Twilight is not the epitome of great books to read. And then as far as Eclipse and Breaking Dawn go, as far as ratings, I did not like Eclipse very much. I always thought it was kind of like the weird one out in the series. Like, I don't know why, it just felt like very much a bridge book. But on a whole, I did not like it, and I felt like the treatment of Jacob was unnecessary and stupid, and I just didn't like it. So I gave that one 2 stars. And then I read Breaking Dawn, and I might have only ever read that one once. I don't remember. But that book is such a dumpster fire of a book, even by Twilight standards. Breaking Dawn got 1 star, and honestly the whole series probably deserves that rating, but because of nostalgia, the rest of the series gets a little bit of a free pass. And then also, because I got Twilight from the library as an audiobook, it also came with Life and Death, the gender-bent version of Twilight, so I legitimately tried to listen to that one. And this is another thing I kind of want to do a separate video on, just to get into all of the specifics about it. I ended up DNFing that one. I did not. I got all the way through the meadow scene, and I think I think Bo was just about to go to the baseball game with Edith, and I couldn't do it anymore. And even at that point, I was already like just fast forwarding to the parts that I actually wanted to see how they were a little bit different. There was not enough of a change to make it valid. Didn't do enough discussion on how these differences actually would have applied. Like, she kept Julie, who was supposed to be Jacob's character, like literally the exact same, like mechanic and everything, werewolf eventually, and she didn't really go into how that would have been way different than what it was in the initial books. And same thing with Edith being the vampire. Like, she didn't really talk about like how much of a difference that would have made. And like, I get she wanted to preserve the actual story and everything, but she could have just done so much better, and it just was really frustrating that she didn't. So I DNF'd it. And I think had I finished it, it probably would have also gotten 1 star, because there was so much opportunity to make it like a truly feminist icon piece and be like, hey, you know, this is why women are awesome kind of deal. And instead it just fell really flat because she was just so obsessed with trying to figure out, you know, or trying to recreate her story. And now that Midnight Sun's out, I am going to read it just because I might as well at this point, but I have even lower hopes for it now than I did. So that about does it for this video. I'm sorry if it's a little bit longer for a wrap up, but I had a lot of thoughts and opinions on everything. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Feel free to leave a comment down below. Also, I don't know what's going on with YouTube, because I feel like some of you guys aren't getting notifications on things. And I think it's just how I'm uploading them. It's starting to get a little wonky, and I don't really understand why. I'm doing all of this off my phone, so who the hell knows. But I do have my October TBR up on the channel if you guys want to go watch that and find out what all I'm planning on reading this next month. And if you guys would like to let me know down below what you guys read this month, as well as your thoughts on what I read this month, we can have a conversation down below. I'd love to talk to you guys some more. So I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and I will see you soon with another video. Bye.